The Knees Over Toes program is one of the most popular and hot topics within the fitness industry right now. But a lot of people aren't seeing success that they want from those types of programs. And let me explain why that's often the case. What does the Knees Over Toes program necessitate? Well, it necessitates, obviously, your knee going very far over your toes, which is a position of knee flexion. Knee flexion is this joint action where your femur is going to need to rotate out into external rotation as your tibia rotates into internal rotation. And this progressively increases the more amount of knee bend that you go into. When people have issues getting their knees over their toes, it's not because of muscle weakness or because they need to force themselves into that position more. It's often because they don't have the requisite amount of tibial internal rotation and femoral external rotation they need to get into that position in the first place. Now, there are other considerations here, like the ATG split squat usually involves someone moving into a lot of hip flexion, and if you don't have that amount of hip bend genuinely available to you, well then that's not going to feel super good. So we also need to be able to move into a position of hip flexion, which, by the way, is also a position of hip external rotation, femoral external rotation. In order for the tibia to internally rotate properly and fully, the foot needs to be able to pronate, and we need the arch to drop in an effective manner. This does not mean that the whole arch collapses down and in. That is a compensatory pronation. We need someone to genuinely get the coupling of the tibia rotating in, and as this happens, the heel needs to move into what we call eversion, and the forefoot needs to move into what we call inversion. So pronation is this little twisting action like this. But if you're just dumping your whole arch down into the ground, that's going to put a lot of stress on the inside of your knee because your tibia isn't going to be genuinely fully internally rotating. So to summarize, in order for our knees to go over our toes effectively, we need a couple of things. We need the right amount of hip bend or hip flexion, we need tibial internal rotation, and we need foot pronation. Many people don't have these things, and for some people, they can brute force their way into this, but for many people, they can't because they are very limited in these joint actions. And until they restore them, they will continue to not see success with these types of exercises. Here's my favorite exercise for restoring internal rotation of the tibia and knee flexion. What we're gonna do to set up for this first option is get a bench or some object we can keep our whole foot flat, and we have a 90-degree bend at both our knees and our hips right here. I wouldn't go higher than that because this is about the right amount of height here where we can really get a good grip of our shin and go through this effectively through the full range of motion. We also have a band around the upper part of the tibia bone. So that is the bottom of the knee, or the top of the bottom of the knee. So if we have our kneecap right here, we have this bone right here under it. We have the band just around the top portion of it right here. So that way we can get a good grip on it. And the band should be tight enough to where you can get some good tension and friction, but not so tight to where it's cutting off any blood supply. And then what we're gonna do is get the whole foot flat on that bench right there, and we have a staggered stance. And the important thing here throughout the duration of this entire exercise is we keep our hips square, or as square as we possibly can. So this looks good right here, foot's flat in the back, and now we're gonna grab hold of that band and wrap our fingers around our tibia, get a good grip here. Now we're gonna start, always the whole foot's flat, but we're gonna start in this negative shin angle position. So this angle right here should be like so, and we have our weight mostly on our outside heel. Now, as we slowly come forward, pushing our knee over our second toe, we're gonna twist pretty aggressively, about a 6 or 7 out of 10, and progressively twist more and more the more this knee goes over the second toe. What we're going to feel is our weight transition from this point right here, that negative shin angle, outside of the heel. As we go forward, we're going to transition our weight more onto the inner heel and first metatarsal head right here. So that's basically on my foot right here and right here. We're not rolling onto the inside edge and losing the outside edge. We're just focused on that transition right there from the outside to the inside. And then we're just going to untwist as we come out. So untwist, go on the outside heel, twist forward progressively as you go more and more into dorsiflexion and pronation of your foot. Okay, so from a side view, we've got this negative tibia angle to start. He's gonna grab the band, start on the outside heel, then as he comes forward, he's gonna twist, and he's gonna go transition more into the inside edge of his foot. The most common mistake on this exercise is people are going to twist their hip outside of their knee, and the knee is gonna dive inside the foot. So for optimal restoration of movement of the tibia and the femur and the foot, we need to make sure that everything stays in line. So we should have a perfectly straight line here as much as we can. So if Trevor, you grab and then you try to keep everything in line as you come forward, beautiful, just like that. If your hip ever starts to dip outside, then you're probably moving too much through your hip. And you're probably also going to put too much stress on the inside of your knee right there. As you progress through this, you can do a couple more sets, but roll the band down a little bit further on your tibia right there. So maybe a couple inches further down, you can do the same exact thing. For some people, this is very helpful. And then you could progressively work it down to the point where you are even lower than that, maybe right about here. But different people have different bone structure, so it will depend on what works best for you. Ideally, at least do up here and maybe a little further down. If you want, you can go even lower. And remember, in order for us to get proper tibial internal rotation, we have to be able to pronate our foot. So here is how I coach pronation properly.
To set up for this activity, you're gonna have your feet staggered apart and something to hold on to if you need that rack support. The stagger is going to be about 1 foot length between his rear toe and his heel. To start out, we want Connor's shin to be plantar flexed, where he has this greater angle between his foot and his tibia. That's going to allow him to move from a place of external rotation into a place of internal rotation as he goes through this pronation drill. What we want to focus on feeling starting out is the outside edge of that heel, his knuckle of the big toe and knuckle of the pinky toe. We don't want his toes to be changing color like he's gripping the ground or he has a lot of weight in that forefoot to start out. We want to really be back on that heel. So to initiate this, what Connor's going to do is he's going to turn his hip of the leg that is forward with him. And what that's going to do is it's going to drive the knee forward. It's going to move his weight from the outside edge of this foot towards the inside edge of that heel, or his calcaneus, and onto the inside ball of that forefoot. And we still want to make sure you can sense his heel throughout this motion. The goal isn't to lose that heel reference or have that heel pop off the ground if this is my heel right here. We want to see pronation of the foot coming down the chain from initiating with that hip. The most common mistake on this drill is people are going to want to press their toes into the ground. Not that knuckle of the big toe, but the toes themselves. So something I might do is when Connor's in this starting position, I might cue him to lift all his toes off the ground, feel those knuckles of the toes with weight, and then gently put his toes back down to feel what it's like to have them unweighted for reference. The other most common mistake is people aren't going to start with this plantar flex shin and with their weight more on the outside edge of that heel, which is more symbolic of what we're going to see in something like heel strike. So that way they're going to start with this shin that is more forward. If you go forward for me, Connor, you're going to start already in dorsiflexion with that more negative shin angle, and it's going to give them less space to be able to move through for this motion. And I would say the last most common mistake is they're going to lean their whole torso forward. And what that's going to do is it's going to shift most of his weight onto that midfoot, forefoot, which isn't what we want. We want that to happen as a result of him turning his hips when he's going through this motion fluidly. If someone's having trouble being able to feel that transition of their weight from their rear foot, midfoot, onto their midfoot, forefoot, and that inside edge of their heel, what we can use is a sock that is rolled up to the thickness of a couple fingers underneath their medial arch. So that's going to be underneath and behind the knuckle of the big toe and right in front of that inside edge of the heel. And what this is going to let Connor do is as he goes down into this pronation drill, it's going to let him feel his weight shift from that outside edge of his heel or his calcaneus onto the inside edge as he compresses that sock into the ground. And then as he goes back out of this motion, he should feel that sock decompress, kind of rise up, and his arch move away from it.
One of the most popular and common exercises in the knees over toes program is the ATG split squat. Now, commonly what this looks like is Jacob's gonna have that leg really far extended behind him, and he's gonna be driving that knee as far forward as he can over that toe. Now, the issue with this is that A, he doesn't have access to that much knee flexion in all likelihood. Most people don't. B, that heel is now lifting off of the ground, which represents a supinated position of the foot or a higher arched position of the foot. And if that's the case, we're not driving genuine pronation and dorsiflexion and internal rotation of that tibia. Now, there are many instances in which in sports or in other activities where the heel isn't on the ground and the knee is being driven over the toe. I understand that, but if we're trying to improve someone's knee pain, you can relax, Jacob. If we're trying to improve someone's knee pain, then we need in the early stages to restore genuine tibial internal rotation, because as the knee bends, fluids shift within the knee to allow that to happen. But if we're in this position one more time, then we're not going to be able to get those rotations at the femur and the tibia as we need, and we're not going to get fluids shifting as we need within that knee. That's going to put a lot of pressure on the front of his knee, and that's not going to be great for people who have knee pain. Now, in addition to that, on the back leg right here, if you just let your arms droop there, Jacob, you'll see that he's in a lot of low back extension. And that is going to put a lot of stress on his low back. That's going to limit his internal rotation of the tibia, because he's not going to be able to get as much external rotation of his femur, and that's going to further lead to faulty knee flexion mechanics. Now, it's good that there are regressions to the knees over toes program. One common one we see for the ATG split squat is that the front foot is elevated on some sort of box like this, and they're going into still a lot of knee flexion. Okay, problem number one is that oftentimes this necessitates a lot of hip extension on the back leg that almost no one has that much genuine hip extension. This leads to a substitution of low back extension, and that is going to feed into the problems we talked about in the first exercise. And the other problem is that still people don't have this much hip flexion or knee flexion, especially people that have knee pain. So that's also going to feed into those issues. Let me show you a better alternative for a lot of people dealing with knee pain. Now let me show you a nice regression that'll be very useful for a lot of people. Now, we have a little bit of elevation here. The amount will vary depending on the individual, but usually a couple of inches is good to start. And we have a little lightweight plate. 10 pounds is really all you need. I wouldn't use more than that. Now, on his foot right here, Jacob's gonna start in this relatively negative shin angle right here, and he's gonna feel the inner heel and the first metatarsal head. That doesn't mean he loses the outside foot. That just means that that's where his focus is, because that will allow him to transfer weight onto his arch for it to drop and for him to move into pronation and tibial internal rotation. Now, he's gonna make sure this back knee stays underneath this hip for the most part, so he can keep a stacked rib cage over his pelvis. And now he's gonna reach that weight plate out in front of him as he descends in a controlled manner into that split squat right there. This will allow him to be in a much better position. And then he can come back up, and then he can go back down into that. And the key here is that we're really focusing on those foot contacts and not forcing ourselves into knee flexion we don't have. We want to start within the genuine range we have, and over time start to improve that. Now, a regression from that would be to offload some of your body weight. You can use a TRX, you can use a cable machine, you can use bands attached to something high, whatever is going to allow you to unweight yourself. So still use the front foot elevation, still focus on those foot contacts, and then just hold on to that as much as you need and lower yourself into it, really focusing on keeping that back knee nice and relaxed. That will allow you to gently lower yourself into the amount of knee flexion you feel comfortable with. So hopefully that's helpful for some of you to understand why this knees over toes approach might not be working for you or someone you may know. Now, I'm not saying that this approach or program is bad. I think that there is actually a lot of value that can be had for it. The problem is I think a lot of people aren't ready for it, and they're going from 0 to 100 real quick, and they don't have the necessary range of motion or movement options available to them. So give these things a try, and I bet you that these exercises will not only feel better, but you'll get more out of them.